They say the Appalachian roads whisper to those who dare to listen. But some stories, they scream. Tonight, we're not just passing through. We're checking into places where the walls remember every scream and the silence holds more than secrets. Welcome to 10 haunting true motels and inns horror stories from Deep Appalachia. These are real accounts, from forgotten roadside motels to dusty mountain inns where guests checked in and sanity checked out. So dim the lights, lock your doors, and whatever you do, don't ignore that sound outside your window. If you're ready for nightmares stitched into the fabric of Appalachia, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop a comment telling us your location, if you're brave enough. Let's begin. Story 1. Vacancy light that wouldn't die. The rain had started just after I left the interstate, that hard Appalachian rain that comes down in sheets, swallowing your headlights. By the time I saw the Blue Lantern Motel, my wipers were smearing more than clearing, and the road felt like it had narrowed with every mile. The place looked abandoned, except for the one lit sign. Most of the letters were dark, but the A still worked, if you could call it working, pulsing in the rain like a slow, wet heartbeat. There was something about the way it glowed alone, like it was trying to tell me the rest of the sign had died first, and it was next. The clerk met me at the door before I could knock, as if he'd been waiting. Too friendly, his smile wide but brittle, like the skin on a day-old pie. Inside, the lobby was stiflingly warm, the air heavy with the smell of overbrewed coffee and that lemony cleaner old places used to hide mildew. My key was on a brass tag shaped like a teardrop, heavier than it should have been. When I picked it up, it clinked against the counter with a tone too sharp for brass, too much like a bell. My room was down a short, carpeted hall, the kind where your footsteps vanish before you can even hear them. The smell inside hit me, pine cleaner and something damp that had soaked into the carpet years ago. The single window faced a gravel lot, beyond which the ridge rose in silhouette, darker than the night sky itself. I tossed my bag on the bed, kicked my boots halfway under the desk, and went for the shower, hoping the heat might cut the road from my bones. I'd been under the water maybe 2 minutes when I heard it, the desk bell. Faint at first, but sharp enough to cut through the spray. One ring, then another, then 3 more in quick succession, too quick for one finger, too deliberate to be random. I froze, listening. It stopped. Then, at 1:13, it started again. 4 rings, a pause, 2 more. At 1:21, it repeated, almost identical, like someone marking spots on an invisible map. I toweled off in silence, the room seeming smaller when I stepped back into it. Through the slit in the curtain, I could see the neon A still pulsing in the rain. The office was dark, except for that light, no movement inside. The bell rang again, but this time it sounded closer, like the walls were carrying it straight to me. I pressed my forehead to the glass. That's when I noticed my reflection wasn't quite right. My head was tilted, but in the glass, it was straight. I turned to match it, and the reflection seemed a half-second slow, like it was considering whether to follow me. Then, the ringing stopped all at once, replaced by a low hum that might have been in the pipes, or under them. I caught movement in the corner of my eye and looked toward the office just in time to see the clerk's door open. It didn't swing onto a hallway or back room. It opened into complete black. Black so deep the light from the A didn't touch it. The door stayed that way for several seconds, no sound, no shape moving inside, then closed with a finality that rattled in my chest. The brass tag on my key gave a single, high chime. I hadn't touched it. It lay on the desk, still as the rest of the room, but the sound hung there like the last ring of a struck glass. My skin went cold. I realized with a slow, crawling certainty that the bell I'd been hearing wasn't on the front desk at all. It was under me. The carpet didn't feel right as I crossed to the center of the room. Too thin in spots, too padded in others. I knelt, pressing my ear down. Faint at first, but growing clearer, came that same deliberate ringing. Not loud, not frantic, but steady, like someone working their way along a row of invisible desks. I could almost place the sound directly beneath my feet, moving toward the far wall. Then a pause. Then two slow rings, spaced out, like the person down there was thinking about the next place to go. I backed away without meaning to, my heel catching on the chair leg. That tiny noise must have carried because the ringing stopped instantly. In the quiet, I could hear something else. Wood shifting under weight, a careful step where no step should be. My eyes kept flicking to the door, but the handle stayed still, the lock slid home. Whatever was below wasn't trying to come up, it was listening. I don't remember deciding to lie down, but somehow I ended up in bed, covers pulled to my chin like that would keep the night out. Every so often the floor gave a muted thump, followed by the faintest brush of metal. I tried to tell myself it was plumbing, settling beams, anything but footsteps. But at some point I realized the sound wasn't moving randomly anymore. It was circling, slow and even, tracing the outline of my room. I must have drifted because I woke to quiet, the kind that presses on your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. I sat up and found the brass tag gone from the desk. It was lying on the floor at the foot of the bed, turned so the number faced the ceiling. I didn't touch it. I watched it for what felt like an hour, waiting for it to chime again. It didn't. When I checked out the next morning, the clerk looked at me the same way he had when I arrived, smiling without warmth, as though he already knew how my night had gone. I asked him, casual as I could, if there was a basement under my room. He took the key from my hand, the brass tag swinging, and said, "No basement." But he didn't look at me when he said it, and I could swear as he turned, I heard a single bell ring from somewhere deep under the floor. Story 2, Room with the Bolted Mirror. The Mountain Inn sat high on a slope above a coal town where the porch lights never went dark, even in the rain. I pulled in late, the kind of late where the sky has no color left and the air feels thick enough to bend sound. The sign out front buzzed weakly, its lettering faded to the point you couldn't tell if the place had ever had a proper name. Inside, the owner was waiting, a tall man with a smile that seemed borrowed. He slid my key across the counter and apologized before I'd even asked a question. "Last guest cracked the mirror," he said. "We bolted it down so it won't shift on you." I didn't know mirrors shifted, but I nodded like I did. My room was small but tidy, with lace curtains and a quilted spread that smelled faintly of cedar. The only thing that felt wrong was the mirror. A full-length thing, too big for the wall, with two thick iron bolts sunk deep into its frame, anchoring it like it might try to leave. The glass was old enough to ripple the light, warping anything reflected there. I'd look into it and see my face, but somehow it seemed farther away than it should have been, like I wasn't standing in front of it so much as looking at myself from the other side. I'd been in bed maybe an hour when the noise started overhead. A dragging sound, heavy furniture moving from one wall to another, then back again. Long, slow scrapes across old wood. It went on for 10 minutes, maybe more, until the ceiling above me fell perfectly still. I lay there, listening for the next shift, when I noticed movement in the mirror. Not my reflection. It was the glass itself, blooming faintly at the bottom like someone was pressing their mouth against it and breathing out. I got up, half expecting to find a draft, but when I touched the surface, it was cold as stone. The bolts, though, they were warm, almost pulsing with it. I stepped back, uneasy, and that was when the scraping started again upstairs. This time it wasn't random. A long drag, pause, a shorter drag, another pause, like a code being tapped out through wood and air. I couldn't understand it, but something in the rhythm felt deliberate, as though someone wanted me to learn the pattern. I held still, trying to memorize it, when I heard a voice down the hall. A woman's voice, soft enough to be mistaken for the wind. "Don't," she said. Just that one word, with the weight of a warning. I leaned toward the door, but the hall was silent after that. Empty, as if she'd never been there. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the bolts working themselves loose, the mirror leaning forward just enough to let the breath on the glass escape into the room. At some point, exhaustion took me, and when I woke, the light through the lace curtains was dim and grey. I didn't notice the change in the mirror right away. It wasn't until I stood in front of it again, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, that I saw them. 5 splayed marks pressed into the glass from the inside, not smudges, but impressions, as though the shape was part of the mirror now. The fingers were turned the wrong way, the tips pointing toward me instead of away, as if someone had stood on my side, reached in, and left them there. I packed my things without bothering to shower. The owner was behind the desk, watching me over the top of a ledger. I thought about asking if anyone else had stayed in the room above mine last night, but the words stuck in my throat. I didn't want to know what he'd say. As I handed over the key, I glanced back toward the hall that led to my room. The mirror was there, just visible through the open door. It looked the same as before, anchored, rippled, still. But I knew those marks would stay. I knew because, even from the lobby, I could feel the bolts radiating their strange warmth, like they were holding something in place that was still breathing, still waiting for the right moment to move again. Story 3. Ice Machine. At the far end. They put me at the last door, 100 feet from anything, with the ice machine rattling in the alcove like an engine that never decided whether to start. Early spring had the mountains coughing up fog in sheets. It rolled across the parking lot and swallowed trucks one headlight at a time, so you saw a glow, then nothing, then a shape you didn't trust. I was in town for a friend's wake, the kind where the church basement coffee tastes like a tire, and folks stand with their hands on each other's shoulders a second longer than usual. He'd gone into the river after a night that wasn't kind to him, and the river kept him long enough to change his face. The family asked me for fish, cold ones, something he'd always wanted for his send-off. That's why I kept walking that hallway, cooler open, bag crinkling like a poor substitute for grief. The hall smelled like bleach, fought a losing war with river mud. Somewhere behind the ice alcove, a laundry room leaked. Steady drip you started to hear even when it stopped. The camera bubble over the alcove was dead, its little red light nothing but dust. I told myself that meant privacy. I told myself a lot of things in that place. On my first trip, the machine worked fine. The clack and tremor, the flood of cubes like broken teeth into a paper cup. I dumped them into the bag and brought them back to the room. On the second trip, the floor felt like it sloped a different direction, as if the building had shifted its weight to lean against the mountain. I kept my eyes on the laminate tiles and tried not to count them. Counting gives shape to things you shouldn't make shapes out of. The third trip, the machine coughed up a cube with something brown sealed inside, trapped like a moth in amber. I held it to the buzzing light, squinting. It could have been a leaf tip or a sliver of bark. It could have been a piece of someone's coat lining. I told myself it was trash that got into the waterline, because a man who's sleeping at the far end of a motel shouldn't ask the wrong questions of a machine that lives there year-round. I threw that cube into the sink back in my room and watched it refuse to melt, as if cold had become its own kind of shell. On the fourth run, the machine stubborned up and wouldn't vend. No matter how I smacked its side or reselected B3 like that would help. Still, the bag in my hands grew heavier. At first I thought I was imagining it, guilt pressing itself into my arms through the handles. But I could hear the shift of cubes in there when I set the bag down, hear them settle like a breath. I opened the mouth and looked. A fog rolled out like the morning river, and I saw frost thick on the plastic, the kind that flowers and creeps and writes its own language. It struck me then that I couldn't see my reflection in that frost. Usually you catch a ghost of yourself in anything shiny. This was more like the bag had decided it. Didn't need me to exist. On the 5th trip, the hallway lights dimmed in a ripple toward me. Not all at once, but in a wave that made the shadows crawl along the baseboards as if the building had a tide. With the last fluorescent tube humming overhead, the ice machine shut itself up with a clench and a shudder. The chute closed, mouth pressed tight. I set the paper cup under it anyway because ritual is better than sense sometimes. That's when I heard the voice inside the metal, close to the grating, a man's voice worn down to the grain. "Leave it," he said. "Not leave here. Leave it." My first thought was that somebody was on the other side of the wall in the laundry room, messing with me, but the steady drip back there kept its rhythm, and this voice pushed through the machine's bones like the sound lived in the cold. I looked down at the bag and saw water stains blooming through the paper, spreading along the seams. They weren't random. They made a line, then a turn, then another line, like the path a person takes when he's not sure if he wants to go home or keep walking. I put the bag on the floor because my hands had started to shake and watched the stains finish spelling what they meant. The same route my footsteps had been taking all night, past my door, around the bend where the carpet loses its color, down the fire stairs that smell like wet pennies, and out the side exit toward the ravine. The wake was in 10 hours. I told myself I had time for one more run, that I'd be done after this, that I'd sleep with the TV talking to the room until the fog lifted. But the machine's voice made a sound like a long sigh through a straw, and something in me decided to ignore every good sense I'd ever been taught. I picked up the bag. It was heavier than any paper thing should be, heavy like a promise. I followed the wet arrows on the floor because I could see them even where the lights had died, like the water had a memory you could read. The fire door gave way under my push and traded the hall's bleach for the night's leaf mold and cold iron. Fog moved through the stairwell as if it had signed a lease. Down on the side landing, the concrete was slick and fat with moss that looked black under the security light. The ravine waited, shallow, filled with winter's garbage and the wet glint of bottles no one wanted to remember buying. The sound of the creek below was soft but constant, a conversation you aren't invited to but hear anyway. At the bottom, I met the chain link fence that was supposed to keep people like me from making choices at the wrong time. The gate was padlocked. It didn't matter. The bag slid through the gap where 2 wires had given up on each other, and I followed, pulling aside a cut that had started to rust back together like skin. My friend used to fish this same creek, telling me the best runs were where the water changed its mind. That's where he'd gone under, between 2 rocks bright with slick, and the river held him for a day that stretched into 2. I placed the bag on a flat stone and let my hands drop to my sides. The cold from the paper climbed my arms in a way that felt like it wasn't concerned with skin. "Leave it," the machine had said, and I did. I left the bag there, and I left a part of myself I'd been hoarding too, the part that believed every death made sense if you told the story well enough. I stepped back, and the bag sighed open without help, like an old mouth taking a breath. The steam that rose off it didn't have a smell I knew. Not fish, not bleach, not river. It smelled like the air in a church foyer when all the coats are wet. It smelled like a last argument. The cubes inside were clear, but they held shapes, not objects, more like distances. A porch light too far to reach. A truck mirror filled with fog, a face you almost recognize at a gas station 30 miles from home. I don't know how long I stood there listening to the creek speak its words against the rock. Long enough, I guess, for the paper to give up and slide what was left into the current. The bag didn't go far. It bumped against a snag and turned in place, slow as a decision. The frost on the plastic wrote a new line and then smudged itself out with water. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from someone asking if I could sit with the family early to greet folks. I typed yes with a thumb that didn't feel like it belonged to me. When I looked up, the fog had shifted, and I could see the back corner of the motel where my room's blinds had misaligned, leaving a single angled eye of light. Something moved across that slit. Maybe it was my own shadow, delayed by a night that wasn't finished with me. On the way back in, the hallway dried itself behind me. The wet footprints closing like a wound you can't prove was there. The ice machine rattled once, and then went quiet, content as an animal fed. I set the cooler by the door and sat on the bed without turning on the TV. The bag was gone, the creak had what it wanted, and the voice had stopped. Somewhere behind the machine, the steady drip counted down to morning. I slept in pieces and woke before the sun, half expecting to find the camera's red light revived and watching me. It wasn't. In the lobby, the clerk handed me coffee like he'd been waiting up. "Fog'll burn off," he said, and it did later for everyone else. But sometimes when I open my freezer at home, frost writes a quick line and then melts blank. And the cold that breathes out is not the kind you buy with quarters. It tastes like a creek that learned my name and is being patient about using it. Story 4. Night Auditors. Quiet knock pattern. The first thing I noticed about the night auditor was the way she held the pen, both hands wrapped around it like a prayer candle, steady and upright, while the wind hustled leaves down the lot outside and pressed them flat against the glass. She was thin in that Appalachian way that doesn't read as fragile so much as efficient, every spare thing in her tucked away for later. And when I asked if the storm was liable to turn mean, she didn't look up, just said, "Just wind," like she'd already decided which fears were worth inventory. The lobby smelled of old coffee and damp carpet, that church basement blend you get in mountain places that never quite dry out after a whole season of rain. She slid a ledger toward me instead of an electronic pad, actual paper with a slight sheen where countless palms had rested, and I wrote my name in a rectangle too small for it. Her finger followed the line as if to check it would stay put. I took the key and walked the infirm fluorescent hallway to my room, counting ice machine rumbles and the small electric buzz above the exit signs. The inn breathing through its own wiring. The storm kept worrying the siding, and when the power went at 2:30, it was as neat and complete as a breath held and not returned. Emergency lights popped on in a weak hospital color that made the wallpaper seams show like old scars, and the quiet that followed was loud enough to learn. That's when the knocking began. 3 quick, 1 slow. A pause wide enough for a person to make a decision. It wasn't loud, not hostile. A courteous little pattern like a memory of the coal tipple siren we grew up on, scaled down for hallways and human doors. I lay there waiting for it to pick a direction, and it did, walking the building like a person who knew exactly how many steps between thresholds. At each stop, after the rhythm, there came the soft rasp of someone steadying themselves on the jamb. That sound moved closer, and I could feel the knocks through the mattress first, more than hear them, the way a train feels in your ribs before it rounds the bend. I put my ear to the wood. The jamb was cold and damp as a root. The knocks reached the room beside mine and stopped one short of me, the way an apologetic wave stops short of a touch. "I'm good," I said without thinking, and in our hills that sentence means I'm scared enough to know it. The knock didn't come. What came was a weight against the bottom of my door and the faint drag of cardboard on tile, and then the ledger, how it had left the desk, I didn't know, slid under the gap, page first, as if the floor had a slope I'd never noticed. I stared at the book because it didn't make sense to watch the door for something smaller than paper when the storm was busy pushing the whole building a half inch off square. The ledger was open to a list of names, a neat column of travelers, none of whom had any business, knowing each other, and every one of them shared the same checkout date written tight and tidy by the same hand. The last line was blank, but when I angled the page toward the emergency light's exhausted glow, I saw a faint impression in the paper, the ghost of a name written, then lifted, like a sticker you peel and place elsewhere. I flipped the page and found a map of the hallway sketched in pencil dark enough to shine, little crosses inked at certain doors. Mine had a cross, a firm pressed X with a dot at the center as if the pencil had hesitated there. Farther down, 2 crosses side by side were half erased into grey smudge, and one door had a circle instead, a circle with a small notch cut out like the mouth of a fish. The knocks moved again, now away from me, ticking toward the vending alcove and then flowing up the back stair, the rhythm smearing for a second where the carpet gave way to bare concrete and then recovering itself, polite as ever. I waited for the generator that never kicked on. The building felt like a held breath, and I stood barefoot because I was afraid my steps would speak if I put on shoes. From somewhere above, metal tapped, an old vent answering the wind. I carried the ledger to the window and palmed the curtain aside. Down the slope, the coal town was doing what coal towns do in storms. Porch lights were on, though no one stood under them, and one street lamp flickered in a pattern that could have been Morse code or just tired wiring. I thought about the auditor at the desk, about her eyes never leaving the paper, and I had the sudden childish conviction that if I walked to the lobby, I would find the pen upright in the ledger and everything else absent, as if she had been copied out of the place and left only the tool that contained her attention. The knock pattern descended the back stair again, slower now, as if balancing a tray of unseen weight. It came down my hall but stopped 2 doors past me and held there so long the pause became its own kind of message. I knelt and put my ear to the seam at the floor and heard the small, dry sound of a page turned by a cautious thumb. Heat rose off the ledger like a person had just closed their hand on it, and I opened to the map and marked with the tip of my nail the last place I'd heard the knocks. When they started again, I followed, because there are moments in these mountains when staying put and stepping out feel equally unsafe, and you pick the fear that asks you to move. The emergency lights made the carpet look underwater, grey-green and wavering, and I passed the door 2 down from me, the one with the long pause, and caught the smell that came through the crack where the latch hadn't taken. Something like a new plastic shower curtain and something like nails. "Don't," someone said from inside, the soft kind of don't you use for a child with their hand near a stove. I turned anyway and asked if they were all right, and the answer was a silence that had nothing defensive in it, only a practiced stillness, the way hunters hold a shape their bodies can barely maintain. The knocks went on, 3 quick, 1 slow, pause, and I trailed them to the vending alcove. There, the pattern stopped. The red in use light on the soda machine glowed though there was no power, and in that glow I could see the dust line where the ledger had been. I understood then, without liking it, that the book belonged more to the hallway than the counter. A door opened at the far end with a breath of pressure, and the thin woman stepped out, not surprised to see me carrying the thing that should have been on her desk. "You don't answer after 2, she said, voice steady, as if reminding herself as much as telling me. "You document." She showed me her hand, and the pads of her fingers were grey where the pencil had lived, the smear of a person who writes through whatever is trying to be spoken. "Who's knocking?" I asked, and she looked over my shoulder at a place on the wall where the pattern would pass if the wall were a path. "Depends who you are," she said, and it wasn't unkind. Somewhere above us, water moved in a pipe and then stopped like someone changed their mind. "You marked me," I said, tapping the map where my door sat beneath its hard-pressed cross, and she pressed her lips tight until they lost color. "We mark doors the wind favors," she said. "It helps later." "Helps what?" I asked, and the storm pressed its palm against the building with enough force to make the exit sign creak. She didn't answer. The knocks began again, nearer, the polite rhythm leaning into insistence, and I wanted to say the words that kept climbing into my throat. I'm good, I am not. But she reached past the ledger and touched the place where my name should have been and wasn't. Her finger rested there like a promise uncashed. The pattern stopped one room short of mine and waited, and in the waiting, I understood what the faint impression on the page meant. Someone had written my name and then lifted it back off, as if to say there was still a chance to put it somewhere else. The emergency lights flickered once, twice, and in the thin wash between pulses I saw the corridor's crosses reappear on the carpet itself, a darkness pressed into nap by countless feet. I carried the book back to my door because returning something is a way to bargain with a night that doesn't owe you conversation. The ledger slid under without complaint when I nudged it forward, a practiced motion, and my door stayed shut through the last set of knocks. 3 quick, 1 slow, a pause that felt like the mouth of a word you don't want to teach your own tongue. I slept only after the wind downshifted to a long, tired hiss, and in the morning, the lights up, the coffee burnt, the town's porches still lit for no one. The night auditor handed me my receipt with a clean square where a name should be, and a penciled map with one cross smudged lighter than the rest. I drove out under a sky bleached thin, telling myself the pattern had been nothing but a building learning the storm, and yet, some nights now, when the house is quiet and my own wiring ticks, I hear 3 quick, 1 slow, and feel my hand drift toward a pen I don't remember picking up, ready to write down what comes knocking and decide, too late, whether to answer or to document. Story 5. Honeymoon suite with no curtain. They gave me the suite because the cheaper rooms were taken by a funeral party. The clerk said it like a favor and slid the key toward me, with his thumb pressed against the number so I had to peel it off him. The door opened onto a room the color of old lipstick. There was a heart-shaped tub sunk in the corner and a window that faced the switchbacks. No curtain at all, just the mountains leaned close like neighbors who never learned how to knock. I told myself I didn't mind. In this part of the world it helps to see trouble coming. But there's a difference between choosing to look and being watched, and I could feel the ridge looking back, the way a dog will hold your gaze without blinking when it's trying to decide what you are. The funeral party had set up camp downstairs. Women in black wraps, men in church shirts unbuttoned at the throat, laughter too loud like they wanted to build a wall against whatever followed them from the graveside. The music came and went through the floor. Gospel, then old country, then the small silence after a hymn ends, and people pretend they don't want to cry. The clerk apologized for the noise and offered me a discount that never found its way to the receipt. Honeymoon suite, he said with a grin that had tired out before his mouth did. Best view on the mountain. It was early spring. The switchbacks were slick and the mist moved in slow columns, and out beyond the guardrail you could see, if you squinted, a line of headstones like teeth set in a jaw of wet grass. I put my bag down and touched the tub. The porcelain still held heat, as if a couple had stepped out minutes before and intended to come right back. There were 2 wine glasses on the tray by the faucet, one dry, one beaded with new water. I told myself housekeeping had a rhythm I didn't understand, and wiped the wet rim with the back of my hand. The glass smelled faintly of something sweet and metallic, like cheap champagne poured into a coin. The mirror over the vanity was clean enough to show the small tiredness in my face that always shows up in mountain towns where the road takes more out of you than you remembered it could. And the window, no curtain, no blind, just a square of night, refused to be ignored. The ridge filled it. The road cut a clean S through the dark, and now and then a pair of headlights would struggle up the curve and disappear as if erased. I locked the door and slid the chain, more out of habit than hope, and lay down on the bed with the TV talking low so the room would believe someone was home. Around midnight, a car crept up the hill and parked with its engine off, just a shape in the mist where the gravel widened. No light inside, no door opening, only the sound a cooling engine makes when it contracts, a long tick, then a shorter one, like counting backward. I watched it without sitting up and told myself it belonged to the family downstairs, and they'd come back to it when the hymns ran out. The heart-shaped tub clicked as it cooled, a domestic little sound that made my shoulders tense for no reason I wanted to name. I must have slept then because I woke to water that wasn't there a moment before. Not a gush, not a leak. More like a drain filling itself, the sound a slow mouth makes when it takes a swallow it isn't sure about. The faucet was off. The plug lay in the soap dish like a button from someone else's coat, yet the tub held a shallow skin of water, and that skin was moving, ripples slapping the enamel in a rhythm too steady for wind. I sat up and stared at the surface until my eyes adjusted and saw nothing but a poor reflection of a poor suite, the kind of sideways view that makes you want to clean your own thoughts. Something past the window, not tall, not short, just a person-shaped absence that paused in the center of the glass, the way a deer freezes when it hears its name. It stayed long enough to count me. That was the feeling. A simple inventory. It moved on, and the mist filled the shape where it had been, knitting the outline back into night. The chain on the door lay on the carpet like a bracelet dropped in a hurry. I hadn't heard it slide off. I hadn't heard the door open or close. The knob gave a small metallic click, like a throat cleared by someone who doesn't want to be impolite. I went to it and found the lock still turned, the chain hook still latched to the frame, though the chain itself had slipped free and fallen. I put it back in place and stood with my ear to the wood, like a kid afraid of thunder. When I turned around, the window showed me something the mirror did not. In the mirror, the bed was empty. In the glass, it wasn't. In the glass, a shape lay where my body should have been, the void of a person against the bedspread, a dent that never rose. I stepped to the window, then to the mirror, then back again, like I could catch the trick at a bad angle. The mountain offered me nothing but itself. Trees stitched into a seam, the black throat of the road, the slight breath of fog as it moved through the guardrail's missing posts. The TV mumbled something about weather in counties I didn't live in. Downstairs, a voice began a hymn I knew well enough to hum and then broke into a laugh that wasn't cruel, just tired. I told myself to sleep. Sleep, you're making patterns from noise. And made it as far as the edge of the bed before the water sighed again. This time the tub wasn't full enough to move. The sound was not of water at all. It was cloth pulled through water. I went to the bathroom and found the plug in the drain I knew I hadn't touched, and the chain on it hummed the way metal will when it's chilled too fast. On the rim sat one of the wine glasses, now set upside down as if to dry, though I hadn't moved it. A ring on the porcelain marked where it had rested before, and next to that ring were two faint half-moons, like someone had leaned their fingers there to steady themselves. The car outside started without an engine turning. No growl, no ignition. It simply became soundful again, the way a refrigerator comes to life and you realize you had gone deaf in its quiet. Headlights stayed dark. The shape remained a shape. I turned off the TV because the voices had become a layer I couldn't hear through and stood at the window, palms against the cool glass. My reflection met me, dim, flattened, but behind it, the bed still held a darker place where a person might be if the room had two occupants and one of them didn't care for mirrors. I'm not proud of how long I stood like that, bargaining with a pane of glass. I told myself to pull the bed away from the window, to drag the dresser in front of the door, to find a sheet, any kind of curtain, to alter the room so it would match what my head needed. But there's a kind of courtesy that's born into people up here. You don't rearrange someone else's house, even if you're scared. You leave things where you found them and hope they do the same for you. Sometime close to 3, the funeral party went quiet all at once, the way a conversation dies when the sentence everyone is avoiding arrives. The building settled, a long ribbed breath through the heat vents, and something touched the other side of the window. Not a hand, more like the idea of a hand, the patchy fog of breath where there shouldn't have been any, right at the height where mine would be if I stood outside looking in. I put my palm to it. Cold soaked my skin like it had time to spend. I thought of the car, the champagne-smelling glass, the tub holding heat from strangers long gone, and a story my grandmother used to tell about reflections, that if you stared too hard, the version of you in the glass would learn the way back faster than you'd learn how to hold the door. By dawn, the fog loosened its fist, and the mountains let go of the road. The car down the hill was gone, leaving only 2 dry ellipses on the gravel where tires had pressed water down. The chain held. The door stayed dumb as wood. I took a quick shower that never warmed and left the towel where it fell, because the room did not feel like a place that took kindly to memory being folded neatly. At the desk, the clerk slid my receipt across with a pen mark where a discount might have been. He asked if I'd enjoyed the view, and I said I'd kept it from enjoying me back. He laughed like that was a normal answer, and maybe here it was. I drove away slow, letting the switchbacks decide my speed. When I came to the pull-off by the wide curve, I stopped and looked back at the building. The honeymoon window glowed with the rectangle of a morning TV, like a mouth talking without a body. I could see myself in it the way you see the shine of your own windshield reflected in another car's glass. Except this time, the shadow in the bed had the courtesy to sit up. It turned its head toward the road as if counting cars, and then it lay back down as if I were already gone. I kept driving because there's a kind of leaving that has to be done in one pass. But now and then, when a room at home feels too open and the night presses the window into a mirror, I let my reflection blur until I'm not sure which side I'm on. That's when I pull the curtains quick, not to keep the view out, but to make certain I don't step into the wrong night and find there's no way back that looks like me. Story 6. Key drop box. Full of names. They told me to use the key drop if I came back late, and the clerk said it like a blessing and a warning both. Just feed the room number inside. Sliding my key across the counter the way church folks pass the plate. Slow enough for you to think about what you're giving up. The drop box was bolted to the wall by the register, a wooden face gone pumpkin soft with age, the slot split like a mouth that had learned to keep secrets. Its metal throat was rusted slick, the kind of rust you only get when something's been wet longer than it's been dry. I told myself it was a convenience. In these mountains, people like to keep the front door closed after midnight. They trust wood more than they trust faces they don't know. I couldn't sleep. The room smelled of heater dust and last winter, and the ridge pressed its weight into the window, the way a big hand will test a door before it bothers to open it. Rain walked the eaves in a slow circuit. Around 12:40, I started hearing metal whispering in the lobby, little touches, keys brushing keys. A sound like distant rain on tin roofs strung down a hollow. It came and went, not frantic, more like a conversation folks have in a funeral parking lot when they think the family's not listening. I put on my boots without socks and went down because sometimes you'd rather meet a noise than let it sit outside your door learning your breathing. The lobby lamp was off. Moonlight pushed through the glass like a body trying to leave. My reflection in the door did what I wouldn't. It leaned into the night and looked easy about it. The register sat with its drawer open to an exact little gap, polite as a yawn you're saving for when the pastor looks away. The keyboard behind the counter was full, brass teeth glinting in rows under a strip of dead fluorescent, except for one empty hook. Mine. I put my hand to my chest before I knew I meant to and felt the shape of a key in my pocket, warm through the denim like a small animal. I hadn't brought it. I had set it on the nightstand upstairs beside my wallet and the folded paper from the wake schedule I still couldn't bear to throw out. The drop box swelled and creaked when the building took a breath. Something in there had swollen with damp until the wood didn't know how to keep its shape. A sign tacked above it said, "Do not open," in block letters faded to pink, the kind of red that forgets itself. I stood a minute and listened to the rain, trying to decide whether to quit. Then I put my fingers under the lip and pulled. It gave way like a stubborn mouth, finally letting a word out. Inside, I didn't find keys. I found paper, hundreds of little squares folded down to fingernail size, damp as leaves and the same colors, brown, green, black, a few with the pale look of mushrooms that never see sun. I scooped a handful, and the smell that rose was not lobby smell. It was creek bank and basement and the breath of coats that haven't been taken from a closet since the person who wore them stopped meaning to. Each slip carried a name, careful or careless, depending on the hand, a room number, and one other word, always the same: late. Some had dates on them gone soft into the paper like bruises healing to yellow. A few were so old the pencil had spread until letters became a fog that still meant something if you were patient. I told myself I was only looking for mine to prove it wasn't there. My fingers sorted without my say-so, pushing aside strangers from towns I could smell on their folds. Coal and stone dust and the chemical lemon every respectable place uses. And as I worked, the slips began to cling to me, tiny wings sticking to rain. They wanted out. That was the feeling. They wanted air they could name. From the hallway came a sound that made the skin on my forearms tighten. Not with terror exactly, but with recognition. It was a soft cascade of metal, gentle enough to be kind if kindness could be made of brass, every door unlatching at once, not flinging open, not a rush, just that easy sigh of a bolt stepping back from its work. I turned to see the corridor and found it darker than a hallway should be, the emergency light above the exit humming like a bee too tired to sting. Nothing moved. The lobby clock ticked like it was teaching itself to keep time. I looked back to the board and watched another hook go empty and then fill itself with nothing, the neatness of a slot where something used to live. The clerk's chair turned a careful inch and settled without anybody in it, as if a person had just stood and the cushion refused to admit it was alone. I didn't like the way my name felt in my mouth just then, so I spoke my friend's instead, the one whose wake I'd come down for, held in the church basement with coffee you could stand a spoon in. He had been a late person all his life, late to clock in, late to call back, late to stop when the river asked him to. Saying his name felt like throwing a rope at the dark and hoping it would find a post. The drop box thunked like something shifting its weight to listen. I unfolded a slip at random and read late in a careful schoolchild hand, the kind of hand that belongs to someone who wants to be forgiven before they're even blamed. The room number matched mine, but the name did not. The paper was older than me. I folded it back down and it stuck to my thumb, reluctant to be paper again. "You all right there?" a voice asked, and I flinched so hard the box mouth snapped shut on my wrist. The clerk stood at the edge of the glow from the back room. He was young the way some mountain men are young until they turn old overnight. His face both before and after. He didn't come closer. He looked at my hand caught in the wooden mouth and winced like he felt it. "Box swells in wet," he said. "Folks get curious." I pulled free. The skin had a shallow tooth mark and the kind of splinter. "That doesn't hurt yet." "What's with the papers?" I asked. He rubbed his thumb over his palm like he was trying to remember a callus. "When somebody's coming in late, they used to write it down for me," he said. "Helps me stay awake. Helps me know who belongs." "Decades worth?" I said, and he shrugged one shoulder, a motion as old as the hills. "Nobody ever thinks it'll be them," he said. "Then it is." We stood there with the rain deciding to stop, and the doors down the hall resting on their latches like dogs waiting to hear which way a man will step. He saw me touch my pocket as if to make sure I still had what I already knew I had. "You can keep it," he said, and for a second I didn't know if he meant the splinter or the key, or the knowledge that my name might crumple small enough to live with the others. "I left it upstairs," I said, because saying it out loud made the night pick a side. He looked past me at the exit sign and did not nod. The chair gave another slow turn, and the register drawer inched open like a mouth practicing a smile it didn't feel. I carried the handful of slips to the counter to put them down and found I couldn't. They adhered. I had to peel them off one by one, and each let go with the soft sound of tape lifted from a photograph. Underneath my palm, the wood was cool, dry, not any ghost story's version of warm. I stacked the papers, and the stack listed, ready to fall. "If I feed mine in," I said, and he didn't answer. He tapped the empty hook instead with the pad of his finger. The sound was small, but it traveled. Doors down the hall clicked once in unison, a reminder to themselves. Water somewhere made a decision and ran in a short, decisive thread. I put the slips back in the box and closed its mouth and pressed my hand on it until the hinges remembered they were supposed to hold. In my pocket, the key lay heavy and civil, the way a coin feels when you plan to spend it on someone else. I went back upstairs and found my nightstand naked except for the wake schedule. The impression where the key had been was still in the wood, as if a small weight can leave a memory in grain. I locked my door and set the chain and slept with my boots on, which is a thing I haven't done since the year I thought the ridge behind my house might walk. Morning came thin and apologetic. The lobby lamp was on. The board was full to brass except for one hook that wasn't empty or occupied so much as undecided. The clerk nodded, like we talked about weather and nothing else. I handed him the key from my pocket and he reached for it and missed by a hair, like the space it took up had shifted a fraction to the left. On the drive out, the road held the tires like hands too tired to cling. I told myself I'd made patterns out of noise, but sometimes, in my own kitchen, I'll find a little paper square stuck to the bottom of a coffee mug, soft and green as creek shade, with my name and my address and that one simple word written small enough to pass through any slot in the world. Late. And when I peel it off, it makes that soft sound like leaving, and all the doors in my house seem to remember how easily a latch can sigh. Story 7. Banquet hall without any guests. The old railings sat 2 streets above the tracks, a brick hulk whose windows glared even when the sun was out. I checked in on a Tuesday night when the air had that late fall bite, the kind that makes metal smell sharper. The clerk was the sort of man who made words feel like coins he didn't want to spend, answering questions without ever offering a second sentence. When I asked about the Wi-Fi, he gestured vaguely down the hall. "Better in the banquet room," he said, like it was a matter of fact, not suggestion. He didn't mention whether I was supposed to have a reason to be there. The door was unlocked. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed the way hornets do when they're somewhere you can't see, steady enough to feel in your jaw. The smell was of old carpet and coffee that had been brewed in metal and forgotten. Long folding tables ran the length of the room, each one dressed in a thin cloth, mismatched plates at each setting. Every fork lay tines down, handles pointing away from the chairs, the kind of arrangement you don't see unless it's meant to mean something. The head table was the strangest of all. No chairs behind it, only a podium facing the wall instead of the room. I walked up to it, phone in hand, and lit the wall. The wallpaper was pale green under the yellowed light, and where the podium's shadow fell, the paper was covered in small, even scores. Hundreds of tiny vertical lines, grouped and crossed in sets of 5. I'd seen that kind of mark before, scratched into wood beams in old mining shacks, tally marks, counting days. Or people, the far exit stood open, letting a damp wind slide in from an alley of wet brick. Kudzu covered the walls and roofline on either side, the leaves trembling as if something breathed beneath them. I could hear the tracks faintly, the slow grumble of a freight train moving in the dark. I stayed where the light could still reach me, scrolling for a bar of service, the signal drifting in and out. That's when the first chair shifted, just a small scrape of wood on linoleum far down the table. Then another, closer, not dragged in a hurry, not pulled out for sitting, but settled, adjusted, making space for something I couldn't see. The sound came again, scattered around the room, chairs turning, not toward the tables, but toward me. It wasn't until the 5th or 6th movement that I realized they weren't circling in a wide loop. They were drawing inward, a slow funnel, closing toward the podium. I told myself it was the building settling, old furniture reacting to the damp. But I could feel the air moving differently now, the space behind me shrinking in ways I didn't want to measure. I stepped toward the podium, maybe because it felt like the only fixed thing left in the room. On the floor beneath it was a stack of programs, the edges curled with age and damp. Each one was for a memorial service, though the name printed on the front meant nothing to me. They all carried the same date, but where the year should have been, the space was blank. The paper was soft, as if too many hands had held it without meaning to. On the last page, in neat serif print, were the words, "Please leave quietly by the alley door." I glanced at the alley. The kudzu was still swaying, though the wind had died. I decided then I'd had enough of the better Wi-Fi. But when I went to the alley door, the handle didn't turn. I pressed harder, then rattled it, locked, not from my side. I crossed the room toward the front door I'd come through, telling myself I'd laugh about this in the morning, only there was no handle on that side either, just the flat wood of the door, flush and bare like it had never been meant to open inward. The chairs were quiet now. Everyone faced me. I could feel the narrow lane they'd left open, guiding me from the locked front to the locked alley. The hum of the fluorescence had deepened, the kind of low vibration you start to feel in your bones. I thought about shouting, but there was no sound in the world that felt like it would help here. The programs were still in my hand, and I noticed now that the stack was thicker than it should have been. I pulled one free from the middle. My name was printed on the front. No year, just the date. I don't remember setting the paper down. I only remember standing at the podium facing the wall, the tally marks sharp under my fingertips. My phone was still in my other hand, the flashlight beam trembling where it hit the wallpaper. Behind me, the scrape of wood started again, deliberate even. I didn't turn to look. The light caught the edge of a fresh line, just one, scored into the paper over the old marks. My finger traced it, and it felt warm, as if the cut had only just been made. Something shifted in the alley. The kudzu rustled in a long sigh, and I thought I heard a footstep on the wet brick. Then the humming stopped. The room felt empty, but my shoulders knew better. I reached for the podium to steady myself, and the wood felt worn in the exact place my hands rested, as if I'd been there before. The program slid from the stack in a slow cascade, spilling across the floor until they touched my boots. The one on top had my name again, and now, where the year had been missing, there was a line, a blank waiting to be filled. I could hear the train again, closer now, but it didn't seem to be moving past. It was waiting, too, I went to the alley door because the idea of standing still felt worse. The lock clicked without me touching it, the sound small and final, like a pen closing after signing something you can't take back. I pushed, and the door opened onto the alley. The kudzu had stilled, every leaf turned toward me. The air smelled of wet brick and something older, like paper left in a trunk too long. When I stepped out, the door shut behind me, soft as breath. I turned back, but there was no handle on this side either. Only the brick, the vines, and the sound of chairs settling back into place inside. The wind moved once through the alley, and the kudzu leaned in just far enough to brush my arm. Somewhere behind the wall, a pencil dragged a short, straight line across old wallpaper. I didn't check to see if it was the second mark in a set. I already knew. Story 8. Vending Room with the Blue Glow. Every motel has that one little room with machines that take your money without thinking twice. The kind of place that smells like dust and warm metal, where the hum from the compressor feels like a second ceiling over your head. This one had an old soda unit from the 80s, faded red once, now gone the dull purple of things that have been indoors too long. It lit the tiles blue, not LED blue, but that deep, old lens blue you get when you look through water at dusk. The glow didn't just sit on the floor, it reached up. I went down for a ginger ale because the heater in my room was breathing out air that smelled faintly like burnt hair, and I wanted something cold to cut it. The hallway to the vending room was short, but the carpet seemed to pull at my steps. Inside, the blue light made my skin look like it belonged to someone who hadn't been outside in years. I stepped up to the plexiglass and saw my reflection there. It didn't quite match me. I'd move my head and it would follow, but half a second too late, like it was thinking about it. I told myself it was just the way the light bent inside the old glass. Long day. Bad light. I dug for change, the quarters cool in my palm, and when I looked back at the machine, the selection buttons were clicking themselves. Not in a rush, just one at a time, top to bottom. Slow as a person running their finger down a page of names they already know by heart. By the time it reached the bottom row, I'd forgotten which one I'd wanted and pressed B7. The sound inside wasn't the clunk I expected, more like a shudder, and then a sigh, a human sound that had been practicing at being mechanical. The door behind me eased shut, not all the way. Just enough for the latch to miss and the air to move against it when the hallway's drafts passed. Each gust made it breathe against the frame, a slow, tired breath you could almost time your own to. I stared at the slot where the can should drop, waiting for that hollow thud. Nothing. I thought maybe it had jammed, and I was about to hit the side when I heard the faintest roll, like something dragging itself forward reluctantly. The can dropped, and the sound it made was heavier than it should have been. I bent to get it, and it wasn't the ginger ale I'd picked. The label was bright, sharp-edged, new printed, but the brand had been gone for years, the kind my grandfather used to keep in his pantry in summer. Appalachian sweet and syrup thick. I'd only ever seen it in glass bottles, never cans, and never in this century. The paper was cool under my fingers in a way that felt deliberate, like it had been waiting in cold just for me. Around the middle of the can was a sticker, white, clean, and printed in a font I'd only ever seen on court envelopes. My full name, spelled exactly the way it appears on legal papers. No nicknames, no errors, just me, formal and whole. I didn't open it. I didn't even set it down. I just stood there in the blue, listening. The hallway outside had gone silent, the kind of silence that isn't empty but listening back. Then, from somewhere just past the doorway, I heard the slow shuffle of rubber wheels on thin carpet. Not fast enough to be pushing anything heavy, not slow enough to be casual. A cart, maybe. It came close enough that I thought it was about to turn in, and then it stopped. Paused. I could feel the weight of it. The way you feel a person holding their breath at your back. Then it started again, moving on without ever arriving. I stepped into the hall. It was empty all the way to the fire door, the glow from the exit sign washing everything the same, flat, red. No cart, no one. My door was 4 rooms down, cracked just enough for a sliver of dark to show between the jamb and the hinge side. I knew I'd latched it. I could see the outline of my own reflection in that gap, my shadow standing inside my room before I'd even reached it. I closed the vending room door and didn't look back until I was halfway down the hall. Inside my room, the heater was off, though I hadn't touched it. The air was colder, damp like the inside of a cooler that's been drained but not dried. I set the can on the desk, and it left a wet ring on the laminate even though I'd barely touched it. I thought about throwing it out, but the trash can under the desk seemed too far down, too final. I told myself I'd leave it when I checked out. I turned the TV on for sound and lay back, but the volume didn't cover the faint click of metal from the hall, spaced out like someone trying each door handle one by one. At some point, I must have drifted. When I opened my eyes again, the can was on the nightstand. I hadn't moved it. Condensation had pooled beneath it, seeping into the wood veneer in a shape not round but long, like something had been lying there beside me. I reached for it, but it was warmer now, as if the cold had moved somewhere else. The sticker was still there, but the ink of my name had run slightly, the letters bleeding toward each other. Not much, just enough that it looked softer. Closer, I set it back down and left it there the rest of the night. The cart's wheels passed my door again in the small hours, shuffling, pausing, and moving on. By morning, the can was gone. No ring on the nightstand, no damp, just the faintest sweet smell in the air, the kind that comes back to you later when you're somewhere far from where you first caught it. I checked out without asking about the vending room. The clerk didn't look up when I handed back the key, just turned it on the counter so the tag faced away from me. I walked out into the cold, but when I got to my car, there it was in the passenger seat. The can dry now, with my name on the sticker. The ink was perfect again. I left it there and drove until the motel was 3 towns behind me. But sometimes, when I stop for gas in certain valleys, I'll glance into the back seat and see it sitting upright on the floorboard, label facing me. I've never opened it. I'm not sure I could. And lately, I've started to notice that the letters on my name don't look exactly like they used to. They look more like handwriting, not mine, someone else's. Someone who knows the whole thing, start to finish. Story 9. Manager's unit with 2 front doors. The manager's unit had 2 front doors that faced the parking lot, side by side like a pair of eyes that didn't know how to blink. I noticed it the first evening without meaning to. One stayed open all night, a perfect black square you could see from the second bend in the switchback road. It wasn't the kind of black that belonged to night. It was heavier, like a place that didn't let the moon in. In the mountains, you learn to mind your business. So I did. But the next night, the sound started. It was crying, though not the kind that breaks and heaves. This was low, deliberate, the sound a grown man makes when he's decided it hurts too much to stop, but he's too tired to start again. I lay there listening, trying to place it. It wasn't close enough to be in the hall. It wasn't far enough to be outside. I dressed and went to the office because the crying didn't pause, didn't falter, just threaded the night like something working a needle. The bell on the counter had been turned upside down, the metal top flat against the wood like someone had decided ringing it was no longer an option. The ledger lay open, neat columns of names and dates under the thin light from the desk lamp. A page marked long stays. My room number was there, a fresh dot beside it that hadn't been there that afternoon. Through the open door into the manager's apartment, I could see a living room that felt wrong without knowing why. A couch sat against the wall, hard enough to leave an actual dent in the plaster, its cushions sagging like they'd been leaned on for decades in exactly the same way. Across from it was another door, same frame, same paint, that opened onto the office I was standing in. It made no sense. I could see the counter, the bell still overturned. The crying stopped in the middle of a breath, and the silence that followed made my scalp tighten. Then came the footsteps. They started on carpet, soft and slow, crossed onto tile, then shifted to gravel. The sound looped like someone walking a small circuit, one that passed through more than one kind of floor but never came closer, never moved away. I stood still, and the air between me and that second door felt like it had weight. The loop continued, carpet, tile, gravel, pause, repeat, and I realized the sound wasn't traveling in a straight line, it was circling. I stepped into the apartment. The air changed immediately, heavier, warmer, as if the place held onto the day's heat with both hands. The smell was faint, bleach and something faintly sour, like wet paper that had dried too many times. I moved toward the other door, the one that shouldn't exist, when I caught something in the corner of my eye. Down the row outside, my own door had swung open. No wind, no one there, just a slow, deliberate pull inward. The chain I'd set slid through the keeper without snagging, spilling loose like ribbon falling from a knot. The crying started again, from both directions at once. It was the same voice, same breath, same rise and fall in unison. My stomach clenched, not from fear exactly, but from the sense that I'd just stepped into something already in progress, something that had been repeating for a long time and would keep repeating whether I was there to see it or not. The steps changed then, doubling, overlapping, one set on carpet, one on tile, one on gravel, all meeting in a place that didn't seem to exist in the lines of the building. I backed into the office without turning my back on the apartment door. The ledger still sat open, but now there was a mark beside my name too, neat and exact, like the tip of a pen had touched the paper for just long enough to leave the perfect dot. The crying cut off again, this time followed by a sound that made my teeth ache. A slow drag, like something heavy being pulled across the floor by someone who didn't care how much noise it made. It came from the open apartment door, then from the hall outside my room, then from somewhere that felt like it was directly behind me, though the air was still. I went for my room anyway, because the only thing worse than staying was standing still. The gravel under my boots sounded too close to the gravel in the loop of steps I'd heard earlier, and I half expected to meet myself coming the other way. When I reached my door, the room was exactly as I'd left it except for one thing. The chain wasn't just undone, it was gone. Not broken, not on the floor. Gone. In its place was the faintest smear of something pale against the frame, like the mark left when you slide furniture across a wall. I closed the door and locked it, the regular lock feeling like a lie in my hand. The crying started again, almost immediately. Not outside now, not from the office. From the space under my bed. Low, even, patient. I didn't check, I didn't move. I sat on the bed with my boots still on, hands in my lap, and listened to it for the rest of the night. It never grew louder, it never stopped. By morning, the sound was gone. My chain was back, hanging exactly where it had been before, the keeper unmarred. When I went to check out, the ledger was closed, the bell upright, the clerk sitting behind the desk like he'd been there all night. I asked him how long he'd been managing the place, and he looked at me like I'd asked the time on the moon. Long enough, he said. Driving away, I passed the front of the building. Both managers' doors were closed now, blank as if nothing had ever moved behind them. But in my rearview mirror, one door was open again, a black square that didn't match the rest of the morning. I didn't slow down. Even now, sometimes in my own house, I'll hear those 3 steps, carpet, tile, gravel, looping in a place that doesn't exist in my floor plan. And every so often, I'll wake to find the chain on my bedroom door hanging open, the air heavier, warmer, as if the room has been holding on to someone else's heat all night. That's when I know better than to listen for crying. It's not meant for me, not yet. Story 10. Last vacancy above the river. The rain didn't fall so much as rise, thick from the gorge, pushing through the seams of the window like breath through teeth. I'd been driving all day with the wipers losing their fight, and by the time I reached the inn there wasn't anywhere else to go. The road behind me was underwater in the low spots, and the one ahead disappeared into fog so heavy it looked solid. The innkeeper gave me a key without asking my name, his hands thin and dry as twine. "The river talks when it's high," he said, and I laughed because it seemed like the kind of local saying you tell strangers. The room was small and square, with a bed that tilted toward the wall and a heater that clinked as it worked. The window faced the gorge, though there wasn't much to see except a smear of mist and the darker weight of the hill on the other side. I lay down without turning on the TV. Around 3, the whole building shifted. Not a shake, but a slow tilt, as if the hill itself had rolled in its sleep and the inn had followed its shoulder. I stayed still, counting the seconds between the truck horns on the far highway, trying to turn the sound into a rope I could hold onto. But after a while, the river took the counting from me. It hit rock in a way that wasn't random. Long, short, long, a pause. Then again, I thought maybe I was forcing a pattern into it, the way a tired brain finds faces in bark or voices in static. But the more I listened, the more the spaces between strikes felt like breathing. It started to sound like words, not loud, not clear, but in the same way you can tell when someone in the next room says your name even if you can't hear the sentence. Except this wasn't the name anyone used for me. It felt older, like the name inside me that had nothing to do with introductions. The one that feels like a shirt inside out. Yours, but not meant to be worn where anyone can see it. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of sleeplessness. I opened the window to prove it wrong, to let in enough of the real sound to scatter whatever my head was building. The cold hit first, damp enough to settle on my teeth. Then, the smell, iron, wet leaves and something deep and still. The smell you get when you lift a rock that's been part of the creek bed longer than you've been alive. The mist pulled apart for a moment, and on the far bank I saw it. Something like a staircase cut into the slope, the stone edges wet and glinting in the faint light. It wasn't grand, it wasn't even tall, just enough steps to take you from waterline to a place you couldn't quite see. Then the river swelled, and they were gone under the surface, as if they'd never been there at all. I closed the window but didn't latch it. The sound kept at me, long, short, long, and every so often there was a shift in the rhythm, like a hand gesturing for me to keep up. I thought about the innkeeper's voice, the way he'd said the river talks like it wasn't a warning or a joke, but a fact. The same as saying a road ends at a cliff. I stayed on the bed until the heater's clinking stopped and the cold came up through the carpet. Somewhere between dark and dawn, I must have slept. When I woke, the river was low again, moving fast but not speaking. The mist was gone. Across the gorge, the slope looked ordinary, green and steep, with no sign of steps or stone. I stood at the window for a while, waiting for the water to change its mind. When I turned to get dressed, I saw them. Footprints, wet, dark against the carpet, starting at the sill and leading to the door. Not mine from last night. They weren't bare, but they weren't from my boots either, and the shape of them was wrong in a way I couldn't name. The door was locked, but on the other side, the prints continued into the hall, headed toward the far end where the carpet faded into shadow. I didn't follow them. I just packed and left the key on the desk, the innkeeper nowhere to be seen. As I drove out, the road ahead was clear and dry as if it had never rained, but in my mirror the gorge still held the fog, thick and unmoving. Sometimes I hear that pattern again, long, short, long, when I'm near water, and I know if I ever answer it, the steps will be waiting.